Scramble, scramble, scramble. At 0757 hours, two Spitfires of the Polish Dębliński 315 Squadron took off from their airbase at RAF Valley in Wales, their Merlin engines growling out over the Irish Sea to intercept, quote, a hostile raid approaching steadily north. At 0834, the Polish pilot transmitted to the base the immortal attack words, tally-ho, tally-ho, and dived his Spitfire at the lone, low-flying German bomber. This story was taken from this book entitled Luftwaffe, Eagles over Ireland, written by two Irishmen, the late Paddy Cummins and Justin Horgan. And Justin was generous enough to allow me use material from this book in my video, and both men spent over 30 years researching the material within the book, in many cases travelling to Germany to visit the surviving aircrews, and in many cases getting personal photographs for inclusion in the book. The Polish fighter pilots were made up of Flying Officer Bolesław Sawacki and Flight Sergeant Lubik Lewowski. Lewowski ran low on fuel and had to return to base, leaving Sawacki to take on the German Ju-88 bomber himself. However, two other Spitfires joined the fight and observed Sawacki engaging the Ju-88. Over the next 9 minutes, a running fight ensued over County Meath as the Spitfires fired on the German aircraft. The Ju-88 took violent evasive action to escape from the Spitfire, despite return fire from the dorsal turret of the enemy aircraft. During a third attack by the Spitfires, the pilots saw tracer strikes on the cockpit cover of the Ju-88, but their ammunition ran out. So the Spitfire was armed with 6 machine guns, firing approximately 152 of these bullets per second, but only had approximately 15 seconds worth of ammunition. The two Spitfires followed the German aircraft down to 100 feet, making dummy attacks, which ceased when both aircraft had to return to base because of low fuel. Flight Officer Sawacki had been seriously injured by return fire from the Ju-88, and his Spitfire was riddled with bullets, which caused him to break off his attack. Bleeding profusely after a bullet had grazed his knee and gone through his elbow, the Polish pilot attempted to land the Spitfire with the undercarriage retracted in a large field 2 miles north of the village of Rathoath in County Meath. The aircraft ended up in a drainage dike, which also resulted in multiple injuries to the pilot. The starboard wing, engine and radiator were torn off and scattered widely apart from the fuselage. The flight officer was brought to the local doctor's house where his wounds were treated. The pilot was later removed by military ambulance to Dublin, but he died on the way to hospital. The Ju-88 was flown by Lieutenant Paul Stormer, and he had taken off from France and was on a photo reconnaissance mission to Belfast when attacked. His aircraft now flew south to try and escape back to France, but his port engine was emitting smoke from the attack. As he approached the Waterford coast, his port engine failed completely. Worse was to come, as 2 new Spitfires from No. 152 Squadron were waiting in ambush over Tramore Bay. Lieutenant Stormer had decided to land on Irish territory when the circling Spitfires were seen in the distance by his crew, but his aircraft was followed over Tramore Bay by the British aircraft. The sound of gunfire coming from the direction of the sea was heard by several people walking on the seaside promenade in Tramore, who also saw 3 aircraft flying low over the bay. Over the next 5 minutes, the German aircraft was observed circling, diving and jinking from side to side over the surrounding countryside to escape the gunfire from the 2 Spitfires. So there are reports of people travelling to the beach that morning or to religious services, as it was a Sunday, having to dive for cover from the stray bullets and empty casings falling from the Spitfires overhead. About 3 miles north of Tramore, Lieutenant Stormer selected a large field to crash land the aircraft after one of the engines caught fire. The rear section of the cockpit canopy and the machine guns mounted in the rear of the cockpit were jettisoned. At 0930 hours approximately, with the undercarriage retracted, the German pilot crash-landed into farmland. The Germans, who were uninjured, quickly evacuated the aircraft, which burst into flames. The airmen had to take cover in the ruins of an adjacent derelict building to avoid being injured or killed by the exploding ammunition and burning fuel coming from the aircraft. After carrying out a series of victory rolls over the crashed Ju-88, the 2 Spitfires returned to Britain at 0950 hours. A young man from a nearby farmhouse was the first person to arrive in the field after the crash landing, but one of the Germans pointed a revolver at him. He was able to persuade the airman to put down his weapon and invited them to accompany him to his farmhouse, where his sister gave them some food. The Germans were relieved and delighted when they were told that they had landed in neutral Ireland. The following day they were taken to the Irish Army HQ on the Curragh of Kildare for internment. And as for Luftwaffe Lieutenant Paul Stormer, the war was over.